2 generations ahead, from A16 Bionic in iPhone 15 to A18, our brand new chip created specifically for iPhone 16.
We have one more chip in the M4 family to introduce, and that's M4 Max.
Apple's custom C1 modem.
So I was just in the process of doing some research when I came across this interesting piece of news, which basically says that there were references to unreleased or upcoming Apple Silicon chips and that they were found in an internal build of iOS 18. We're talking code names for all those chips and CPU IDs for most of them. And that got me wondering about something. What stage is Apple at in terms of developing those chips, and what inferences or conclusions can we reach about Apple's strategy for those chips based on what we might know about them so far? Well, that's what this video is for. In this video, we're going to focus specifically on Apple's A-series SoCs, M-series SoCs, and C-series modems. Okay, so let's start with the A19 and A19 Pro, which are expected to be included in the upcoming iPhone 17 lineup. It looks like Apple is going to be sticking to TSMC's 3nm process, and so that means that Apple isn't looking to transition to a 2nm process chip right now. The move to a 2nm process is likely planned for next year with the Apple A20 series that would be used in the iPhone 18 lineup. Now you might be thinking, well, if they're going to be sticking to 3nm, what improvements can they make realistically? And that's a fair question, because it might be unclear to some of us what Apple is focusing on specifically for this year, if they're going to be delaying a significant step forward like switching to a 2nm process. Well, it seems like the main focus for the A19 and A19 Pro is going to be the power efficiency aspect, with a more minor focus on actual performance. In doing so, Apple will make sure that the new iPhones are as efficient as possible. Now, some people are suggesting that Apple might want to do this because they want a bit more flexibility when it comes to battery size. So the battery sizes for the current iPhone 16 lineup consist of 3561 mAh and 4674 mAh for the iPhone 16 and 16 Plus respectively, as well as 3582 mAh and 4685 mAh for the iPhone 16 Pro and 16 Pro Max respectively. Improved power efficiency can allow Apple to reduce the size of the battery while maintaining the same battery life, if not make some improvements. Now, what that means in terms of performance though is that the top spot will essentially be left to the upcoming Snapdragon 8 Elite 2, which is set to have outstanding CPU performance with Geekbench scores exceeding 4,000 for single-core performance and exceeding 11,000 for multi-core performance. But with that being said, the A19 series will still most likely bring better performance compared to the current A18 series, with some suggesting that Geekbench scores would rise from around 3,600 to around 4,000 for single-core performance, and from around 9,100 to around 10,000 for multi-core performance. So I suppose the real advantage for Qualcomm here will be in multi-core performance. But definitely an interesting situation and approach to this year's A-series chips. There is a greater focus on power efficiency while not completely dismissing performance, but there is also the increasingly likely foregoing of a 2nm process, which basically means that Samsung will indeed be the first manufacturer to release an SoC that is based on a 2nm process, and that honour will go to the Exynos 2600. So definitely very exciting stuff there. But let's talk a bit about RAM now. The current iPhone 16 lineup features 8GB of RAM across the board, but it's expected that Apple would be bumping up RAM to 12GB. I mentioned this in one of my earlier videos around 6 months ago, and it looks like this hasn't changed. Now, it's unusual for Apple to increase RAM on iPhones by 4GB in one go. The most we have seen so far is a 2GB increase from 6GB to 8GB. Of course, 12GB of RAM would be great because it would improve the ability to handle high workload and would make the iPhone more suitable for working with heavy apps, whether it's just one heavy app at a time or whether you need to work with multiple heavy apps. And when coupled with the fact that Apple usually does a good job at optimizing RAM management, this is definitely something to keep an eye on. But the 8GB configuration won't be disappearing actually. Now, what that means is that there will be a combination of 8GB and 12GB used across the iPhone 17 lineup. So, which iPhones will have which chips and how much RAM? It looks like both the iPhone 17 and iPhone 17 Air will feature the A19 SoC, But the iPhone 17 will still come with 8GB of RAM, whereas the iPhone 17 Air will be getting the RAM increase. On the other hand, both the iPhone 17 Pro and 17 Pro Max will feature the A19 Pro SoC, and they will both get the RAM increase. Let's move on to the M series. Now we know that Apple is currently working on production for the upcoming M5 series, but what can we expect in terms of performance? At this stage, it seems like the M5 series will be based on a 3nm process, similar to the A19 series. More specifically, they will utilize TSMC's N3P, which essentially offers a more advanced 3nm process than the one used for the current M4 SoCs, which is the N3E. Now, typically when you move to a smaller process or develop an improved version of an existing process, you can generally expect improvements to your user experience from a performance and power efficiency perspective. In this case, the improvement might be a bit less significant compared to what might have been achievable by transitioning to a smaller process chip. But with that being said, we could potentially see a 15 to 25% overall improvement over the M4 series. Now, this is rather minimal, and you probably won't be able to tell the difference in day-to-day use, especially if you're moving from a Mac device that uses an M4 series chip. But if you're moving from an older device, the boost to performance and power efficiency will be much more significant. Another interesting piece of information is that the M5 series is expected to enhance AI performance. Now, this information is rather vague because it doesn't really tell us which aspects of AI performance are concerned here. So, for example, are we talking about Apple Intelligence only? Or are we including third-party online AI applications and LLMs? And do these enhancements potentially extend to anything AI related that is run locally? But one thing is certain, improved AI performance is always welcome and will definitely help in keeping up with the rapid growth of the AI space, with the recent release of OpenAI's GPT-5 being a good example of this. The M5 series lineup will be diverse and will likely feature 4 variants. So that's the standard M5, the M5 Pro, the M5 Max, and the M5 Ultra. I would personally be particularly excited to see an M5 Ultra specifically because of how much of an improvement the M3 Ultra was over the M2 Ultra. I'd be very curious to see what the limits would be for an M5 Ultra. Lastly, I also wanted to talk a bit about the Apple C2. Now, we don't know as much about Apple's next modem as we know about its upcoming SoCs, but the Apple C2 is still very interesting to talk about. The iPhone 16e was unique not because of it as a device, but because for the first time in an iPhone, Apple had included its own modem, technically dropping Qualcomm. Now, I made a video a few months ago about how important the release of the Apple C1 was, so definitely check it out. When it comes to the Apple C2, it looks like the plan is to include it in next year's iPhone 18 lineup, which would significantly reduce the reliance on Qualcomm modems in iPhones, and so this would be an important step for Apple towards more control over its devices. From a more technical perspective, we are looking at improved power efficiency compared to the C1, as well as improved transmission speed. Also, a significant addition would be mmWave support, which is the fastest 5G standard. This is already supported by Qualcomm Snapdragon 5G modems like the Snapdragon X71 5G in the current iPhone 16 lineup. Now, obviously you can make the argument that the C1 didn't feature mmWave support because of limited range and not being used that much around the world. But the C2 was an indication that Apple might have other ideas. But what do you think? Are you particularly excited about any of those components in particular? Do you think they'll bring about significant improvements? Or do you think there's not much to look forward to? I'm very curious to hear your thoughts down in the comments. Thank you so much for watching. I really hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, please like, share and subscribe. And feel free to let me know in the comments if there is anything tech you're interested in and want me to make a video about. Also, please consider supporting me by donating to my channel through buymeacoffee.com. I would really appreciate any support as I continue to bring fun and interesting content like this. Only if you can, of course. Link down below. This was the Wizard of Tech, and I'll see you in the next video. Take care.